Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. You're watching our cloud school where we are discussing various data integration problems and how do we resolve those with Azure Data Factory as a service. Today in this demonstration we are going to talk about a special activity which is set variable and how do we use this activity type with Azure Data Factory as in demonstration. That is what we are going to discuss. So let's look at the demo and learn how to use set variable activity. So for the demonstration, I'll be using the same Azure Data Factory instance which we have created in our previous videos. Here you will find the different factory resources like data factories, pipelines, dataset, data flow, Power Query and all. Now let's have a look at the variables. Like in our previous example, we have discussed about the parameters in detail. Now if I talk about a pipeline concept, pipeline as a resource, so the very first thing you found parameters section, right, which is available here, and after that you have another section which is variables, right? So if I click on this variable section, you will find that you can attach a variable with your pipeline activity type, right? So if I click here, you would see that the way I create a parameter, I can create the variables as well. Again, we have to provide the name to your variable. Let's call it as a name as in let's say file name. I want to call my variable name as in file name. You can choose the file variable type. Default type is of course is a string type, like we have the default type with parameters as well. And then you have got the limited set of type which you can use. For an example, you've got the string, boolean, array and integer. These are the only type which you can use. Whereas if I go to the parameter, let's call it a file name here as well, because these are two different instance types, so the names are not going to be conflicted with each other. But here if you look at the data type, it has got a long list compared to the variables, right? So this is a list here which contains the string, right, integer, float, boolean, array, right? Whereas here in this case the list contains string, boolean, array and integer, right? These are the type. So that's one difference. Now the way you define the value to these variables, of course you can define the default values, right? Or what you can do here is you can also use or set the values to these variable with a special type of activities. Let me show you with that. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly create a data set so that I can copy a file which is of type CSV. So for that I'm going to use the data set name as in sync. I'm not going to waste too much of time on creating this data set, but just to show you an example, I'm going to choose a specific container where I have my file. I'm not going to specify the file name because file name is something we want to get it from the variable name, right? Here my sync is ready, right? I'm going to use the wildcard path and here I'll specify which file to use. So the way we have used the parameter, right? Similarly, you can use the variables as well by clicking on this dynamic content option. So as soon as I click on this dynamic content option, here I should be able to use either variables or parameter. Let me show you that. Let's click on this add content. That will open the pipeline expression builder, and here you have the option. Do you want to use the parameters? Do you want to use the system variable? We are not interested in system variable for now. So let's talk about the variable section, which is a very last tab. And if you want to use the variables, click on this variable. So you can see that the expression for a variable is slightly different than the expression for the parameters. Here you got the variables as in the keyword, then you have got the opening bracket, closing bracket, and then the name of the variable. If I just remove it with this expression, which is this one, right? Remember that? If I remove it and try to show you the expression what we have it for the parameters, let me just remove it. you would find that, or maybe just if I can come add it just below to that, you would see that there is a difference. It has got pipeline, then parameter, then name of the parameters like this, whereas here in this case it has got variable, and then inside the variable you have to provide the name. That's another difference. Let's go back and use the variables like this, right? So here what we are saying is source should read the name of the file which is given in the variable name, right? Similarly, I'll provide or create a new sync type wherein I will specify the name of the file which we would like to create as in sync. I'm going to give it a name as in another sync. Let's call it as a unique name. Again, I'm going to specify the name of the container. And we are not providing any file name, destination file name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create or provide the file name as in parameter, right? So here in the case of sync, we'll go to the parameters. I'll create only again sync file name, another parameter we have created, and we want to use this parameter. But of course, there is no option to provide the value of the parameter at this dataset level, because if we go back to our dataset which we have just now created by clicking on this open button, here you would find that the option to specify the file name is empty. The option to specify the file name is empty right now, and that is the reason if I'm trying to validate the pipeline, it will say that please specify the file name. So I have to first of all parameterize this dataset. Now there is no option to create a variable with the dataset. You can attach the parameters with the dataset like we attach a parameter with any other resource type. That is what we have discussed in our previous video. But the variables are something which you only specify with the pipelines. You do not have any option to create a variables with dataset or data flow, any other type, right? So that is another difference if you look at here. So I've created a parameters file name, and I'm going to specify the file name parameters like we did in our previous example by clicking on this add dynamic content, and here I'm going to specify the file names. So what does it mean is my sync dataset is now parameterized, and if somebody wants to use this sync dataset, they have to provide the information of the file name as in parameter. So now if I go back to our pipeline, you would see that my dataset has now got an option as in parameter which I have to specify here in this section, and you have to specify the name of your parameter which is the file name like this, right, which you have to specify. So let's specify the parameter value of your dataset with the help of the variables which we have created within this pipeline. So again, I'm going to click on add dynamic content option. I'm not using any parameters here, but I'll go to the variable section, and this time I'll say that sync variable file name, right? Now here in this example, we have seen that how to use the variables at the source and how to use the variable at the destination, and destination which is having a data set itself is asking for a parameter, and the value of the parameter we are passing from as in variable, right? Now the question is how we will provide the information to these variables, because if you look at our variables as of now, it does not have any default values. The default value column is empty right now. You can see that here, right? Now how do we provide the value? If I'm going to validate the pipeline will successfully validate it, and if I'm going to debug it, it will say that it will only asking for the parameters, but it's not asking a value for the variables, right? So that is another difference. Parameters are accessible as in resource, generally available resource, and whenever you invoke the resource, the parameter values will be asked by that particular resource instance, right? But the variables are not something going to be asked, which means that when you run the code or run that particular instance, at the runtime, the program will evaluate the value of the variable, and if it has got the valid value, then it will work. If it has not, then it will fail. So obviously in this case, our source file name and the sync file name parameters or the variables does not have any values as such, as you can see. So it means that it will fail because it is empty right now. There is no file name to read from source. There is no file name to read at or write at the destinations. It might fail, right? So how do we pass the parameter in? How do we pass the value of a variable in this case? Okay, to specify the value of a variable, we can use the set variable activity, so which is this one. So there is a special type of activity available with pipeline, so which you can specify and use to set the value of a variable. Now I click on the activities. You have to specify or choose the variable which are being already available within this particular pipeline. You can see that I'm getting two variable name, the variable which we have created with this particular pipeline, and I can specify, I can choose the value or provide the value of this file name. So let's look at the value as in this output, which is, let's say, rakesh.csv. So this is what the value I want to provide. So the value of this parameter is there. Now I have to create another set variable to specify the value of the second parameter, which is the sync type. In this case, I'm going to show you another way of providing the value. You can see that I'm getting an option here, add dynamic content. I can specify a programming expression to provide the value of my variable, right? I can combine file name, some of the system variables, let's say I can make use of the functions, or even I can make use of some other variables as well, right? For an example, whatever is the name of the source, I would like to append some new GUID with that. I can do that. So let me give you an example. Let's say I want to make use of concat function, right? With the concat function, what I want to do here is I want to, let's say, combine this file name, which is the value we have it, with the source file name. Next, we would like to, let's say, use the function, right, which we have it in the system functions. I would use a unique GUID, which is available in the string functions. I'm going to double click on this. So that will generate a unique GUID. Again, I'll have to provide the type of file name, or which is the extension type. So what I'm doing it here is I'm concatenating the file name what we have it here, and then along with that I'm providing the name of the file, or as in GUID, and then appending to the extension. All right, or I can simply, let's say, do it like this. Let's add GUID to as in prefix, because we already might have it or extension already available to the file name, so we don't want to add the extensions. It's going to append a prefix as in GUID, and whatever is the file name, it will keep it as is. So that's going to be the name of my second parameter. Then next thing what I may want to do is I may want to, let's say, set the dependencies. For example, this particular action will happen first, this particular action will happen second, and then I'm going to make use of the third action or third activity, which is the copy activity. Now this is how we use the set variable. I can create another variable by clicking on this new, but as soon as I click on new, I have to provide the value, let's say new var. As soon as I click new var, what it will do is it will create another variable like here. So whether you create a variable here or you specify or create a variable from here, ultimately it will create a variable in this particular collection only. Okay, so let's go back to our variables and choose the same variable sync name. So now we have got the variable set using the set variable activity, which is the file name, variable set, which is the sync file name, using some kind of expression functions or the system functions, right, combining together. Now the difference what we have it here is parameters. You cannot have the expression. If you look at the parameters, there is no way you can specify the expression. You have to provide the parameters according to the value type which you have it. You do not have the option to provide any system defined functions or expression. Basically you cannot use the expression builder to pass the value or to calculate the value of a parameter. Whereas in case of variable, you can use the expression builder to calculate the value of a variable, and that you can provide or set within the activity set variable activity, right? That is what we have seen. Another thing is, like we know, it's the boundary is not, it as the value we are setting it with the help of set activity, which means that it's not going to be available outside the boundary of the pipeline itself. Now one more thing to remember here is I can add another set variable activity. I would say that let's make a call after this pipeline copy activity, and what I can do here is I can make use of the same variable which we have already set, which is, let's say, file name, and I would say done. So what is going to happen here is the file name, you are setting the source file name, which is this. Destination file name is created. You are copying the file from one location to other location using the copy data activity and these two variables, because these two variables are being used at the source and the sink. And then once the copy data activity is going to be completed, you are again changing the variable name to some other values. So what does it means here is, within your pipeline at any time you can override the value of the variable, which is not possible with the help of parameters. So parameter, once it is provided, the value will remain same. So parameter is, you can think parameter as in constant values which you define with your program, so it cannot change the value of the parameter. Whereas the variable, at any time within your pipeline logic, at any stage, you can override the value of the variable. That is another difference, right? So now if I run this pipeline, validate the pipeline, that should work. It will have the name of the parameter. It's asking for the parameters of my pipeline, but I'm not using this particular parameters. I'm going to delete it because parameter just to show you I've created this parameter, but I'm not using it. So I'm going to click on debug, and that should basically instantiate the pipeline. It should set the value of these two variables. I can anytime click on the variable values. You can see that the value of the variable, which is a target file name, appended with a unique GUID, then the file name .csv, and my source file name, which is this one, has been created, and the source file name is, let me just have it, the source file name, which is this one, right? So my copy activity, if I look at the copy activity, should be successfully creating a copy at the same source container, which is this one. It has successfully created, and that is how I can make use of set variable activities and the variables anywhere in the program. And finally, it has created or reset the values of the parameter file name with a value done, right? So afterwards, let's say if I have another activity, I want to make use of the same file name variables, then what will happen is the variable name it will use is the overwritten values which is been set at the step number 3, or using this set variable activity, which is third activity, right? So that is it in this demonstration. Just to summarize, we have seen the use of the variable, how to use it, the variable, how to set the variable using the set variable activity, what are the difference between the parameters and variables within the pipeline. And just to repeat again, the variables are only available within the pipeline, right? The variables will not be available on any of these data set or data flow or any other activities type. You can see that as of today, at least not available. Let's say with the data set, only variables, only parameters are available. Similarly, with the data flow, only the parameters are available. There are no concept of variable on the other type of activities, whereas the parameters are available across any other resource type which we have it with your data factory, whether it is a link service, data set, data flow, query, any other type, right? So that is it in this video. I hope you have found this useful. If it is, please give it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching it. See you in the next video.